Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. As you know, local elections are coming, and by the 11th of October, we will know who will be the Mayor of Auckland from 2025 to 2028. If you live in the Auckland region, or if you are just very curious about the answer to that question, then tonight's podcast is going to be of special interest to you because tonight we're talking with Kerrin Leoni, who is running for the Auckland Mayoralty. This is an opportunity for us all to learn who Kerrin is and a bit about what she brings to the role, her vision for Auckland, and why you should vote for her. Welcome to the show, Kerrin.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me, Gerard.
You're really welcome. Let's start with who you are and what you bring to the role. I'm just going to recite a very summarised CV of your recent experiences. You've been the Deputy Chair of the Council-Controlled Organisations Committee, which meant that you actually have had direct insight and oversight into organisations like Watercare, the Ports of Auckland, Eka Panuku, which is urban regeneration. And so you understand the issues and the governance issues at that level. In addition, you've actually also been elected to the FO board as an elected representative, and you hold two master's degrees, one of them in, I think, youth development and international politics that you acquired in London, and the other master's degree in Maori development. You're also the mum of 8-year-old twins, and you've had over 20 years of business experience. So you bring a huge amount to this role. You're running as an independent, and you're also a member of the Labour Party. Can you elaborate a little bit more then on who you are, your skills and experience and background, and the ones that all of that you think is relevant to the role of being the Mayor of Auckland?
So, no, kia ora, and thank you for just summarising some of the mahi that I've done over the last 20 years. I actually started my career in South Auckland, of all places, and initially was a social worker and went into property investment in my early 20s, buying and selling properties by the time I was 21. I was a supervisor by the time I was 23, and that was supervising social workers in South Auckland that were more than double my age and making significant decisions in that role. And then I went to the UK when I was 25 and started my own consultancy over there. I spent 10 years in the UK, and my consultancy was basically aimed at social service senior roles across the UK. I've worked in places like the Isle of Man, down in Guernsey and the Channel Islands, and really enjoyed that experience, and actually really enjoyed living in places like London, where you could see the great transport and infrastructure that they have there, and such a thriving, livable city. And so I did my second master's there in international politics and economics. So I'm actually a qualified economist as well, because I've always believed that, in terms of addressing the poverty issues here in Tamaki Makaurau and right across our country, is being able to share and understand knowledge around financial management for New Zealanders that have never had an opportunity to learn those things. So I've been investing in property, as I say, for more than 20 years, and run my own business and done a number of other roles in that 20 years. So I think I bring all of those skills when I am now putting my name forward to run for Mayor of Auckland. But I think most importantly is that international experience and living in places like Europe, where you know that unfortunately, Auckland is just so far behind in terms of where we should be as a global and livable city. We know we should have really good transport infrastructure across Tamaki Makaurau. We know it shouldn't take 2 hours to get from South Auckland to West Auckland on public transport. And we know even simple things like having a train from the airport that connects with our current infrastructure is something that is a basic need for our city. if we want to actually grow our economy, and also be a tourist attraction. We know that tourism brings in a lot of money for the country, and we could be doing a lot more here in Auckland. And we are such a beautiful city. We've got beaches, we've got all of our beautiful forests, we've got everything to offer, but we know that there's just so much work that needs to be done for our city to bring it up to speed to where I believe it needs to be. And all of this talk about, oh, we've got to cut this and we've got to cut that. I mean, actually, we should be focusing on the future of our city and trying to work in partnership with central government and every other organisation to get this done. I mean, we can't just keep talking about these things for years. We actually need to see action. And otherwise, we know Auckland is going to have over 2 million people very soon. And if we don't do something about that infrastructure, it's going to take us 4 hours to get from one side of the city to the other. Our motorways are just going to be clogged up, and even students are telling me, they're deciding to drive into the city centre to go to university because it's cheaper for them to park at a Wilson's car park than what it is for them to, catch public transport. So we've just got to really move with the times, and there's a huge urgency to get all of these things done for our city. So kia ora, that's just some of the background that I bring in terms of my international experience, and obviously being raised here in Auckland as well.
It's pretty impressive. Well done. Can you tell us your high-level vision for Auckland in the future, and what you think are the key steps and challenges that we need to overcome in order to bring your vision to fruition?
No, and that's a good question. And I think that high level vision is definitely coming back to some of those basic things, like Auckland having a goal to be a more livable city, and to have the best transport and infrastructure that we can as the biggest city in our country. And so I'm very passionate about us actually getting some of these big infrastructure projects underway. Just last week, actually, we did I did an interview with staff around the train out to Huapai. Now we know that the population is growing out there rapidly, and that's because people can't afford, even though we've had the 15% drop in the valuations of property, and some people have actually commented that homes are being bought in Mount Roskill, 2-bedroom homes for $600,000, which I thought was interesting. But we know that people tend to live out in the outer suburbs because it's cheaper. But actually that means that then they have to drive into the city centre, which is taking them 2 hours because there's no transport infrastructure or any other alternative for them to come in. So the answers around why we don't have that train line running out there, for me, I believe is not good enough. We need some really definite answers, and we need to overcome these obstacles that are ahead of us and just start getting things done. I mean, surely if there is a train line there, I've heard that there's issues around a tunnel, there's issues around this and that. We need to just really get investment into that whole project and just get it up and running, rather than putting these things off. So the high level thing is definitely around livable cities, affordable housing. As I say, the valuations have dropped, but that doesn't mean that we're getting more people that are actually owning properties. One of the good things that I have seen recently is the build to rent, and although that's not about getting on the property ladder, but Ockham in particular have done a build to rent in Waterview, which means at least those tenants will have a clear idea on how much rent they'll be paying over a long period of time, and at least that's stability for them and their family. I'd actually love to see more things like key worker housing in our city. And I know in places like the UK where local government have more power around having these types of programs put in place in the city. And I mean, these are the things that I think we need to do now. We need to attract talent into Auckland, and we need to make sure that there's affordable housing for them. So things like the Tamaki Regeneration Project out in East Auckland is doing really well. Councillor Bartley has bought herself a flat out there, and it makes it a lot more affordable to get onto the property ladder. So we need to be reviewing the way that we work with some of these developers, and review the criteria to try and make sure that we are getting more Aucklanders, giving them the opportunity to have affordable housing as well. Absolutely agree with density done well, but again, very concerned about us continuing to build in areas where there's floodplains. I mean, we've had 15% of the homes built in Auckland, or the resource consent signed off, which are in floodplains, and that's just unacceptable. You know, we know that central government have that role to play, though. We can't do that as local government. Central government are in the process of negotiations and talking through how we're going to address that. But I mean, there's an urgency. It shouldn't take years for these things to get done when we've already had 2 floods in our city. Climate change has to be a priority for Auckland, and we need to make sure that we're future-proofing our city. So definitely climate change, future-proofing, livable city, and reliable transport right across Auckland are some of the key priorities that I'm focusing on.
Wow, that's great. So far, there's only been a few candidates that I'm aware of who are running for mayor in Auckland. I'm aware that Paula Bennett withdrew, that Desley Simpson pulled out, and so far we've got Wayne Brown, a Christian Conservative fellow named Ted, and yourself. That's all I'm aware of, that there's 3 of you. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about your perspective on Wayne Brown's record. For those that don't know, Wayne Brown's the incumbent mayor, and you may actually have some things that he could have done better, or some things that he's done well. But what's your scorecard like for Wayne Brown?
Well, I wouldn't be putting my name up to run for mayor if I thought that he had the highest scorecard. And look, I think there's some things that Wayne has brought to the table around some of the finances that has been helpful. But actually, when you look at his leadership style, I think that it's been quite concerning, and I've raised this a number of times with him. And you know, I actually did make a comment on some of the jokes that he made, for example, around Desley only being good for shopping for Lamborghinis. I mean, you should not be in the role as the mayor of Auckland if you're going to make jokes like that, and especially for someone who has been your deputy mayor that has actually worked hard to do a lot of the work that he would not have done on the weekends, and because we know that he's got another home up north, and Desley has done quite a significant amount of work there in his absence when he's not in Auckland. So, you know, what I would say is that I think Aucklanders have told me that they want to have someone who has got a different style of leadership that will actually get things done, because they're not, they're not convinced with what he campaigned on, which was sorting out the road cones, sorting out everything in council. And yes, some of the CCOs have been brought back in-house, but I guess the question for Aucklanders is, do you feel that there have been significant changes to Auckland? And what I'm hearing is that there hasn't. So we need someone who can actually bring back a vision for Auckland, try and champion a 30-year plan for our city, which will have key milestones that we can reach and work towards with central government and other partners to get things done for our city. And I am still a believer that we don't want to have wasteful spending. I have on the night of my launch, I actually spoke about the policy of bringing a lot of our contracting back in-house. So the example that I gave on the night of my launch was, for example, Ventia. I've had a lot of feedback that people don't feel that Ventia have given that care and pride to certain parts of Auckland, and they would actually like to see some of that contracting localised, because right now a majority of our tier 1 contractors at council actually take the profit offshore. A majority of those tier 1 contractors are Australian owned businesses. And we need to stop that. We need to look at our circular economy in Auckland, and we need to be giving Aucklanders all of those jobs, and we need to try and make sure that they are local so that they actually take pride in the work that they're doing. That's been a significant concern for a lot of people that have talked about the future of Auckland and what they'd like to see, because when you look at Auckland Transport and a lot of the concerns that have come up, even in regards to the speed humps and so on, and the $500,000 that goes into them, if it is localised, there will be a lot more transparency, I would say, and control over how that money is spent. So I do agree with bringing Auckland Transport back in-house as well. And I do agree with us reviewing the whole way that we do our procurement and our contracting, and to make it more transparent with Aucklanders to see how every single dollar is spent. Because right now, Aucklanders do not have that faith in council that the money is being spent properly, well, especially with Auckland Transport. And we need to do better in terms of elected members to actually show Aucklanders that we're spending money in the right way and that we're supporting local businesses. So that's also another area that I'm really keen to focus on. And we know there's a lot of great local businesses that could actually do that work.
Great. I'll talk to you a little bit more about value for money soon. I'll just mention on the topic of Wayne Brown, I had read some opinion about his performance. He came into the job with a Fixing Auckland campaign in 2022, and the people I read anyway were saying it appeared that he didn't really know much about the issues that he was going to fix, because he ended up taking credit for a number of things that were happening anyway, but he also went on a lot about how he was going to sell off the ports of Auckland. He even had a beach named Brown's Beach there where, people could go. But it turned out that the ports of Auckland were pretty good and saved a whole lot of money themselves. And then, according to this opinion, Wayne Brown started to take credit for that, and what he had promised in the first place didn't transpire. And he spent $1.7 million on a report about it all. So when we're talking about value for money, there's those kind of issues. Wayne also did talk about bringing the CCOs back into council, and it was just a question of what cost there was for some of those. Can you, comment on any of that or anything more around Wayne? I think I agree with what you're saying, that he probably doesn't have the best scorecard, but he seems to be getting a bit of a positive rap from certain right-wing media in Auckland.
Yeah, and I think that there has been a lot of, there are a number of Aucklanders who actually find Wayne's style of just having a go at everyone all the time quite funny. And, when you look deep down into what has actually been achieved, it is a real concern, because as you say, with the ports of Auckland, that report did cost over $1 million. And I mean, yes, he did say, look, now that you've confirmed that you can actually bring that revenue in and increase the revenue coming to council, we're not going to lease the ports out now. Well, actually, did you need to do a $1.2 million report for that, when you could have probably just sat down and had that agreement with them beforehand? People have been concerned about backdoor deals. That's been very clear throughout this term, that a number of councillors have raised those concerns, especially when you do look at the airport shares. I mean, he said again that a majority of those funds, the first billion or 800 million, that the first tranche of shares was sold for, that a majority of that was going to go on debt. Now, I urge people to do their own research, but actually only 200 million out of that 800 million went on debt, and the rest didn't. It was basically spent. And yes, we do have capital works that need to be done, but if you're going to say that it's going to go on debt, then that's what it should go on from my perspective. That was our biggest asset. That has now been sold. And hey, look, the future fund is there, and the remainder of the, the money from the airport shares is in that future fund. But regardless, that really was something that should, from my perspective, have been saved for future generations. So it's like he's come in, he's sold our biggest asset, he spent 1.2 million on reports regarding the ports, and made a decision based on something that could have been made before even spending that amount of money. I know he's done numerous trips overseas as well. I mean, he's been to Brazil, he's been to China. There's been, a number of trips, one of them costing $80,000. And I think at the end of the day, Aucklanders just need to know what they feel they have got from that. Do they feel that actually Auckland has done better as an outcome of that? Or do they feel that actually, better leadership is required? And the other concern that's been raised is no one sees Wayne at anything across the city. I was just with a family member in Manurewa on the weekend, and she said in the last 3 years she's never seen Wayne. Now, the job of the mayor is to actually be visible as well and to show vision to Auckland. And whilst I understand that Desley has done some of that as the deputy mayor, it's actually his job to do that, to be leading that foresight for the city and actually making people feel excited about living in the country's biggest city, and that's what I think, obviously, I would bring to the table. Obviously, the other issue is the median age here in Auckland is 35. I looked at the numbers on that, and we need to reflect the population that we have and show that we can have younger people actually looking at longer term planning and committing to those plans. I always strongly believe, though, to have people who have been, have been in management roles and in politics a lot longer to mentor, but you have to at some point retire and actually do some succession planning and pass that on to other people who can do the job, who have experience in business, who, I've done 2 terms in local government. I've been the deputy chair of the Waitemata Local Board, which is probably one of the most controversial local boards in the city, and been the Faux Ward councillor. So it's quite interesting that people are saying, well, you're only a first term councillor, and I'm saying, well, actually, I've done 2 terms in local government. I've lived overseas. I've travelled to more than 60 countries. I've run a property investment here in New Zealand and run my own consultancy in the UK. But no, you've only just done 1 term in local government, and it's really disheartening, but it's all about actually our city and our country moving forward with the type of leadership that we know our city deserves. So that's why I'm just going to continue to keep going.
I think people need to wake up a little bit about
wake up
who they're talking to when they're talking to you. Let's talk about transport in Auckland and your policies to get Auckland moving. What are the key things that you wish to prioritise around transport?
So I think I know we're in the process right now of looking at what is going to happen when Auckland Transport is brought back in-house, but a couple of the things that I have touched on, which I am advocating for, is that train out to Huapai. Again, I think that's, the train line is already there. We just need to get the trains up and running. I would love to see a train that eventually goes out to the airport, whether that links with Puhinui or Onehunga, but we need some form of transportation other than the bus line, is my view. And I'm thinking about the long-term plan for our city. And when you look at places like Sydney, who have looked at partnership models where the user has paid to obviously have that infrastructure in place over 30 years, and then it comes back to the council, we need to be looking outside the square in terms of how we do some of these negotiations and work in partnership. The other area that I've been looking at is the train line from Avondale to Southdown. I know that there's still a significant amount of consultation that will need to take place for that. But look, these are all things that I am really excited about to see for the future of our city. You know, there are still huge concerns around how effective our current transport network is. I mean, when I've been over on the North Shore and listened to constituents there who have said to me, even though the line that comes into the city centre is really good, the bus line, but actually it's about getting from one suburb to the next that people are saying that they're frustrated with. So we definitely need some kind of review on how the bus network is working across Auckland. And we need to make sure within that 30-year plan, like the Avondale Southdown line, that's going to save so much time in terms of people getting across our city. And I'm very excited again about our CRL opening next year.
Sometimes we talk about smart tech and optimizing traffic movement, this kind of thing.
Yes, I'm a fan.
Yeah, oh, that's good to hear.
I'm a big fan.
What's your view on congestion charging? Because we're hearing a lot about different funding options as well for some of these projects. What do you think about congestion charging?
Yeah, and we have initiated that debate. We have already had some conversations around that, and I think that for Auckland, and knowing that we've had $500 million taken from our budget in terms of our transport budget for Auckland, that we do need to look at other forms of revenue to cover our transport in our city. So look, I would say that I do agree with some form of congestion charging. What level that's at and whether, you know, people who are obviously senior citizens and things like that, you know, that they're only getting $300 a week to live on. We need to be able to look into the detail around that. But look, essentially I do support some form of congestion charging, but we need to be very aware that the cost of living is one of our biggest issues in Auckland at the moment, you know, and I think on the weekend we were at that march regarding youth homelessness, and knowing that, you know, the average rental in Auckland now is I think around $700. It's just, you know, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous how people are actually surviving. And at one point I heard that police were having to go and get food parcels. You know, these guys are doing the hardest work in our city by looking after Aucklanders and having to get food parcels. So congestion charging does need to be considered, but we also need to be looking at what's realistic in terms of people's income in Auckland, because especially when you're looking at people that are having to do night shifts and things like that to go from West Auckland to South Auckland, and it's, you know, that they have to do it. But if they're on minimum wage, then how do we work that out? Like if it's going to be $50 a week for a congestion charge, and that's quite a lot of money for them to come up with. So we need to be reviewing all of that, as well as our bus fares, you know. Again, students are telling me that $50 is too much, and they're actually driving into the city centre regardless of the fact that we've got the $50 cap on our weekly transport at the moment. So yeah, we need to review all of those things and make sure whatever plan we put in place around congestion charging, that it is affordable.
How do you think we should actually go about solving the housing affordability issues that lead to, you know, homelessness and people being unable to, you know, people going into debt basically to pay the rent, etc. Are there solutions that you can talk about, or where are we at with that at the moment from your point of view?
Yeah, like I know that that's essentially a central government issue, but I think, you know, the examples that we've talked about with the build to rent programs, you know, just having families know what their rents are going to be at least for 5 years, I think is a huge benefit. I mean, it's not solving the big issue that the rents are still so high, but at least having some security around that. And as I say, the shared equity programs, we need to continue with doing that, even though we're very aware that central government is just pulling so much funding on, well, I think there's been several homes sold in Auckland that were kind of order, just, yeah, at the moment it's really dire. So the answers, I think, are going to be difficult to achieve when we know that that funding just continues to be ripped out beneath the Aucklanders who need it most. And so my view is that we need to have a very strong, I'm writing a letter to the ministers about that, but we need to have a strong voice as councillors and the Mayor of Auckland, the current Mayor, to be pushing back on some of these things. That is our role as the leaders of Auckland, to be saying, hey, come on, central government, this is the biggest city in our country and people are really suffering here and you need to do better. It's not good enough. There were huge plans to build more social housing and all of that stuff has been stopped. A lot of those projects were just put on hold and all the funding was taken away. And so now we are going to have this increase of homelessness and people living in their cars and parking, at parks and having to use communal showers and things like that, because the situation is getting worse and it's really concerning, and they need to be held to account. This isn't just about having a lifestyle for the rich and those that do have properties and their investments to continue being able to take the money from, the tax man, basically. They're already having a great life. And, when you think of other countries like Australia, where they have stamp duty and all these things in place, actually, where property investors are not reaping the amount of benefits that New Zealanders have for a very long time, we need to put a stop to that, and we need to focus on the most vulnerable people in our city and how we can address that. So no, look, I agree with you on that, is that central government need to be held to account, and we need to be pushing back as the leaders of our city.
One of the issues that I read about this morning, actually, from Simon Wilson in the Herald, he detailed that the rail corridors and this whole multi-level density housing notion that Chris Bishop is into with the RMA at the moment could become one of the big central mayoralty issues, because he was talking about fairness, really. I think Western suburbs would be lined up for these multi-level townhouses all around the railway lines or a certain distance from railway lines. But these leafy eastern suburbs would be either given an exception or bought into that, which could be quite highly a big hot potato. Do you have any thoughts on what we're seeing in that regard? When it came to the whole density thing, there used to be an accord, but National walked away from it, and from what they'd agreed with Labour about, and here we are.
Yeah. Look, I think that debate has been going on for a long time in Auckland, and it's really clear when you look at equity across our city, and I definitely get a lot of feedback from constituents in places like Avondale around the units that are going to be built in the near future. I think another 700 units that are going to be built there. And look, although we know that we need more homes in our city, and even spread across the city, and knowing that there still needs to be parks and green spaces for all families in Auckland is a real concern. So look, from my perspective, I'm not happy about the fact that all of these other things are not necessarily taken into account, because they're not going to put 700 flats in Orake, are they? They're not going to kind of have a big massive building of like all these 700 flats in areas where we know constituents will jump up and down about that. And it's not right. We need to make sure that the planning that happens for Auckland is an even spread, and that it is a livable city. We talk about equity in such a way that, you know, we discuss it in debates and then it gets swept under the carpet and then nothing is done about it. And it's like, oh, well, we'll just pretend that didn't happen, and we'll keep going, shall we? Well, actually, no. Let's actually put our foot down on some of that stuff and just say this is not going to happen anymore. We're not going to sign off consents in an area where we know that there's already a huge population there that doesn't have the amount of green space that is over in Orake, or, well, you know, this is not just to call out Orake, this is calling out lots of parts of our city, which I'm not going to go through every single part, but, you know, that's just an example. Where we know that intensification should be evenly spread. So again, we need to be pushing back on that, is my view, and we need to give Aucklanders the opportunity to live a life that has all of the amenities in place that they need. You know, you can't expect a place that's overpopulated, that's not going to have as much green space as other areas, and to expect that those children are going to grow up you know, on an even keel. And I think the research has been done that there are certain parts of Auckland that have, I think, 3 pieces of playground material to other parts like South Auckland that only has 1. When you work out the ratio to the people that are living in that area. And that is wrong, you know. We know that the amount of money that's spent in terms of development contributions is not evenly spread across our city. So even though you've got the 700 apartments going up in Avondale, is that development contribution going to stay in Avondale? No, it's not. It is not going to stay in Avondale. And I think that's wrong. You know, I think it's really, it's been a long time coming that we need to make sure that these areas that have not had the attention that they need are prioritised. South Auckland, I think as I raised earlier, you know, the airport shares from Manukau City have been sold, and what has South Auckland received? Nothing. They've received nothing after their multi-billion-dollar shares have been sold. And that, again, is another example of bad governance, I believe. You know, we need to make sure that we actually have an even spread across our city.
So earlier I just said, well, we'll come back to value for money because it's one of the classic neoliberal arguments that we have to cut. And of course, under the circumstances where everyone's experiencing a bit of a cost of living crisis, the last thing that ratepayers want is a big rates increase. Like you mentioned, I think we can deal with some kind of increase as long as we know what it is, and it's the uncertainty that's a bit of a problem for us all. But when it comes to your policies about value for money and spending, what are they in order to keep these rates down?
I'll come back to the contracting because, you know, my view is that I think that's probably the area where we can make a significant, I'm not going to call it cut, but review on how we spend money. And I know that has already been identified with a couple of examples over the last year. But, you know, there's these 10 points that have now been identified to work along the lines of it, which is localism, you know, reviewing how that money is spent. But from my perspective, it's actually not strong enough because, you know, the implementation of that should have actually been done yesterday. And it needs to be, we need to make that transparent to Aucklanders, which is still not happening. You know, Aucklanders understand we have the budget, and then we talk about the budget and how that money is spent, but actually the detail on that contracting and so on is usually not shared, and sometimes it's difficult to access that information. You know, under the leadership that I would want to have if I do become mayor, is that I'd want to make that information a lot more transparent to Aucklanders, and I think accountability is a really big one. So I wouldn't, you know, I think in terms of saying that we need to cut more, there is also that balance of increasing revenue. We know that, for example, the rates for parking has gone up, which is additional revenue for the council, and we do need to be looking at other ways that we can actually make money. and balance out if there is other parts of the business that we can be making savings on. But I think it's when I talk to some constituents and say, in the first year we were looking at cutting things like the Citizens Advice Bureau. Like, that was ridiculous to be doing that. If we're going to make changes or we're going to cut things, it should be in a very planned way, and show how that change is actually going to be of benefit to Aucklanders, rather than just say, I'm going to cut all these things because it should be dealt with by central government. Like, that for me is not good leadership. And as I say, I think there are really big picture things that we can make changes on. Look, to be fair, I look at the CRL and I look at the fact that it did go $1 billion over the projected costs. And look, some of that will be around inflation, and I get that. But I also know people that have been working on the CRL and told me that there were some materials that were thrown away that there was nothing wrong with them, but there was a change in design for things. Like, that cannot happen under our watch, and we need to make sure that we are across all those things, as well as supporting the best infrastructure for our city. I want us to have world-class infrastructure and world-class train stations and things like that, but it also does need to be within budget. If we can't afford to have the big flashing lights for everything, but to have something that is a medium version of that, and that has been raised as well. When we do design our parks and playgrounds, there hasn't really been caps on budgets for them to work to, and sometimes when it goes over what projected costs are, it's kind of done back to front, whereas we actually need to say, okay, this is the amount that we're going to spend on this playground upgrade, and we need to stick to that, and build in inflation into that contract. And then if contractors go over that, then they should be fined, from my perspective. They should build that inflation into that contract.
Okay, well, you were talking earlier about fairness and investing in parts of Auckland that need it in a balanced way. So my question is, when it comes to West Auckland and South Auckland, how will you ensure that they don't miss out and they get the levels of investment that they really need?
Yes, no, that's a really good question, and I have been a huge advocate, obviously, for the two West Auckland wards, Waitakere ward and the Faux ward, to have swimming pools. And right now, West Auckland only has one swimming pool. My ward has 80,000 people, and then I'm sure the Waitakere ward has a couple of 100,000 people, and that's not good enough. I know that the mayor has said, oh well, tell them to catch a bus into town and go to Brownie's pool, and I'm like, well, some people can't even afford to catch a bus, Mr. Mayor, and actually, if we're talking about livable cities and having equity across our city and making sure that we've got swimming pools available to all Aucklanders. And I have to say, I did actually go out to West Wave during the school holidays and had to stand for an hour to wait to get in there with my 8-year-old twins. Like, that's, again, we're in 2025, and to have to wait for a whole hour in the heat with your children, and you're paying rates, like, really, we need to make sure that we are an accessible city that has the basics in place. So West Auckland, I know that's definitely a priority around the swimming pools. And for South Auckland, I'm aware that they've got some particular projects that they're wanting to look at too. So I know that the Fix and Finish Fund is something that the local boards are wanting to see come to fruition, and and that needs to happen as well, because every single local board has got a project that they want to see finished, and we will need to have those discussions. But of course, I'm definitely advocating for the areas that need it most, and we know West Auckland and South Auckland are definitely two areas that have missed out on amenities in the past.
Okay, let's talk about the campaign that you're running and what lies ahead. What do you see as the main things that you need to do to win on the 11th of October. Previous local elections in Auckland only had a 35% turnout, roughly, and I understand from stats that they were about 60% people who were a little bit more senior in years, and that younger people just tuned out and stayed away. So do you think things will be any better this time? And as I said earlier, what's ahead of you with your campaign now?
Yeah, look, we are definitely, people in my campaign team know that it is, the numbers of turnout are so low, under 40%, as you said, 35 to 37%, 19% in South Auckland, an area that probably needs to have more funding invested into their area. Haven't been interested in voting, don't understand voting, and look, we're 12 weeks out from 11 weeks, I think now, out from voting, and I do find it disappointing that this is the biggest election that is happening in our city, yet we know that there's always a much stronger focus from the bigger media outlets on central government. And look, I get that there is a lot happening in central government at the moment, which is disappointing, but also this is about democracy for our city. And we've got more than 1 million people, 1.7 million people living in this city, and most of them that I'm speaking to don't even know that we've got an election happening within a few months' time. Now, that is not democracy from my perspective, and it's actually really disappointing given that, we are the powerhouse. Auckland is the powerhouse for the country in terms of our GDP, in terms of economic development, and in terms of leading for the country. And look, equally every other city, I'm sure it's very similar, but I spoke to a 25-year-old student who had just finished her law degree, and she knew nothing about local government. She knew nothing about the elections. So I think that speaks volumes that when our most highly educated don't even understand that we have this election coming up is really, is really hard to believe. But look, we know that we are going to have to run a campaign which will be, we're looking at every single option. I know, I do want to acknowledge Sharon, and one of the suggestions was to even look at doing a big march through Auckland, a march for democracy. And it's like, vote for whoever you want to vote for, but just make sure you vote. I know that Liam Brown was able to achieve around 50% when it first became a super city, and I know that he, he told me that he knocked on nearly every door, or as many doors as he could, but he ran a 1-year campaign every weekend knocking on doors, because obviously, Len just had the numbers and the time and energy to be able to do that. Obviously, it's been very different this term. It's been a really, it's a really challenging term because I'm also on a number, I think it's about 9 committees altogether. So, to get out and knock on doors after we've been doing 8 hours of debating, which can be a very long day, is quite a big ask. So I think what will happen is on the 2nd of July, when the nominations go in, hopefully people will start paying a little bit more attention. We are going to be running a strong campaign to get out the vote, and to really encourage people to even consider doing the special vote and just get that done, because we know that all of the libraries will have the special voting booth, so you can update your address and do your vote all in one go, and we will just be trying to drive that for Aucklanders and give everyone the opportunity to even know. I mean, it feels like actually the people that are campaigning are also educating Aucklanders. I mean, Auckland Council has got some budget, and I know that there have been teams going out. We had a presentation earlier this week to our Haukura joint governance board with the councillors, stating that we've got people out there engaging, but to reach 1.7 million people is a big job, and I think the only way you can do it through comms is like on TV, radio, which they are going to eventually do. But people need to start reading about who the candidates are very shortly, and that will be in the next few weeks. So hopefully we'll get an increase in people even understanding that there's a local government election coming up.
Exactly. Well, finally, I'm going to ask you the big question. It's actually not, it's the final question. And that is, why should people vote for you?
I think people should vote for me because it is time for change. It is time for Auckland to have strong leadership that is actually going to take our city forward. That Auckland needs to have a leader who is going to have positive leadership for our city, that is going to work hard to bring us up to standard with other global cities in the world, to make it a livable city, to make it a safer place for us to raise our children, and to actually provide vision for Aucklanders right now, and to be visible across our city as well. So those are all the things that I'm sharing about my leadership style for Auckland, and I know that there's a lot of people that do want to see that change, so I'll be doing my best to get out right across Auckland, and let them know about my policies, and know that there is someone else to vote for to be the next mayor of your city in this coming election.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been very, very interesting. And on behalf of the audience here, I wish you the very best of luck with your campaign.
Thank you so much, Gerard, and all my love to Waiheke Island as well, where I went to high school, and whakapapa there through my Ngāti Power link. So ngā mihi nui.
Fabulous. Catch you again soon.
Thank you.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.